Okay, so before we get started, I would just like to introduce the representative of the project here. So my name is James Philpott. I'm the project manager at the European Digital SME Alliance, and we are the open call managers for the FLUIDOS project. And with me today is Fulvio Risso, who's a professor at Polito, and he is the technical coordinator of the FLUIDOS project. Today in this webinar, we are going to introduce to you the second open call. So to start with, I will give you a very quick overview of what the FLUIDOS project is. I will leave greater detail on that to Fulvio as he is the expert. And then I'll introduce the kind of practical and administrative aspects of the open call. And then Fulvio will introduce the technological aspects and kind of how the system works. And then we will have a long Q&A session. So as you can see, we've got half an hour for that. So if you do have any questions, you can either drop them in the chat as we're talking and we will revisit them, or you can just wait until the Q&A session and ask them then, either through the raise your hand function or writing them in the chat as well. But don't worry about that. We've got plenty of time for it all. So we will save questions to the end. Okay, so firstly, very quickly, what is FLUIDOS? So it is a flexible, scalable, secure, and decentralized operating system, which aims to use the unused processing capacity at the edge and integrate different edge devices together. How that happens, I will leave this magic up to Fulvio to explain. You can see the objectives here for what we're hoping to achieve, but I will speak more practically about the open call and what we're doing here. So before I go into detail on the FLUIDOS open call, just for those of you that might not be aware what this grant process is, this is something quite specific to European funded projects. So it's got different names. It can be called cascade funding, financial support to third parties, sub-grants, or even grants themselves. And essentially what this is, it's money distributed from a European finance project to third parties who are external to the project consortium, with the idea that these grants are intended to complete a specific task or activity that contributes to achieving the project goals. And so within FLUIDOS, this is our second round of open calls, and these play an important role in helping us develop our technology and validate the platform that we're creating. So in this open call, we will be providing financial support through use case grants, and these are available to both individual applicants and small consortia, so up to 3 entities. But no matter if it's an individual applicant or a small consortia, the maximum amount of grant that we will make is 120,000 euros. And these will be granted to 5 successful applications. And these grants, they come with an obligation or a contract to undertake the work that is set out in the application and then report back the results to the project. So some practical details about this. The applications are done via our open call platform, which I'll show in a moment. The deadline to apply is the 4th of October, 2024 at 5 p.m. That closes at 5 p.m. Brussels time. And to apply, you need to complete an application form, sign a declaration of honor, which is where you agree that if your project is selected, you will undertake the work unless there are particular circumstances. And if you are an SME, you need to sign a declaration that you meet the criteria of an SME as given out by the European Commission. So practically, as I said, you apply for the open call via our platform, which I will drop the link in the chat in a moment, and I will show you this page as well. Do you see the website, or you're still on the slides? Just to check, Fulvio, do you?
Website.
Website, okay, perfect. So this is where you apply, thank you. Here you have a link to our white paper, which is an explanation of the system. You can download the guidelines for applicants, and you can download the application template itself. What is the grant for? It's a very good question. So the grant, as I said, is for use cases. So this is basically to take the FLUIDOS system and integrate it and deploy it within your own domain to validate its use and validate its functioning. So in order to apply, you have to create an account. And then once you've created an account, you go to the application form. We collect some details about your company profile, where you're located, and then you indicate which area of our subdomain, and then you upload the application. So the applications are done in Word documents and then uploaded as PDFs. So you don't need to worry about entering a lot of detail on the platform and then some technical problems happen and it all gets lost. It's all done offline and then uploaded here after after you've completed the application. So if I go back to the process, as I mentioned, the platform takes all of your details. On the platform is also the guidelines, which give you a lot of information on eligibility, how to answer the questions, what you should be putting in your application, as well as the application template as well, helps you guide you through this. There is also documentation such as our publications and the project deliverables, which give you background as well to the system. Once you've applied and the application process is closed, we will take about a month to do the evaluation. So this is done both externally through evaluators that are not part of the project, and also internally through a kind of eligibility check and kind of technical compatibility check as well. Finally, once the evaluation process is complete, we notify all of the applications of the status. If your project is selected, we then sign the sub-grant agreement within 1 month, which means the evaluation process will take place in October. The grant agreement or sub-grant agreement process will take place in November. And then the projects themselves will start in December, which is when the first 50% of the grant is awarded. 4 months later, we tend to have a midterm review to check the progress and make sure that everything is on track and offer kind of corrective advice if not. And then at the end of the 8-month period for the grant, the remaining 50% of the grant is awarded. So that's how the grants run. To give you some, maybe preempt some questions that are already asked, it's worth reiterating what the deadline is, which is the 4th of October, so still 3 weeks away. Applications received after the deadline, they cannot be accepted, unfortunately. If you look through the website, we offer the services of FLUIDOS Champions. These are project partners who are able to review a draft of your application. So unfortunately, we get a lot of requests for this. So this is a kind of a service that we offer from the project partners that's only available for 1 check. So the idea is that you have your draft finalized and they can go through it. It can't, unfortunately, be an ongoing kind of back and forth where they offer advice. So we do really recommend that you read all the documentation available, check out the white paper and the deliverables as well, and then use this to write your draft and then go for a check, because unfortunately their time is really limited because we get a lot of applications for this. Also, for the champion service, if a request for this is received within 10 days of the deadline, we can't guarantee that the review will, or the draft review will be received back in time to make any changes, because of course these they're doing it in their spare time for the project, so it can't be guaranteed that it will be returned very quickly. If you applied in the first open call, you are eligible to apply to the second, but only if your application was not funded as part of the first open call. This is due to the fact that the Commission places restraints on the amount of money that projects are able to give individual entities as part of cascade funding. And so that means if you've already received funding from us, you would go over this amount. And so we aren't allowed to do it, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. For the eligibility of who can receive the funding, this is the same criteria as who can apply to Horizon Europe project. This information is inside the applicant guidelines, so you can check there. It's all the associated countries, but just to note that the UK is not eligible because they weren't associated to Horizon Europe. when this project was funded. So if you were intending to create a consortia with UK partners, it's important to note that they can't receive funding. So either they would have to fund themselves or you would need to find another partner, just to make you aware of that. Finally, before I pass over to Fulvio, just some advice based on discussions with previous applicants. As I mentioned, it's really important to read the publications and the deliverables that are on the open call page and on the FLUIDOS website. It really helps you understand the technology and what we're trying to achieve. In the applicant guidelines, it details the evaluation criteria for the application form. So this will help guide you when you're putting your answers into the application, and it will show you what we're looking for from each section. Something to bear in mind when you're doing your application, I think Fulvio might touch on this as well, is the purpose of these open calls is to help validate FLUIDOS and our system. So that's why we are awarding the grants. So in your application, make sure to bear in mind you want to be describing how FLUIDOS will help you, kind of what FLUIDOS can improve within your domain. What is it that you do differently or better? So essentially, why do you need FLUIDOS? How does it change your current work processes? Because this is what we're looking for. We are running these open calls to help us validate that FLUIDOS is successful or not, which is also a valid response or a valid outcome. So remember to always try and demonstrate why FLUIDOS is important to you. And in this vein, it's important to check the existing use cases and pilots, because if you duplicate something that's already being done within the project or within the first open call, this will be a consideration in the evaluation process. And finally, when you're writing your application, if you are integrating your own software or using it in any way, please make sure to explain what it is or what it does. If you do this briefly and then link to a source such as a publication, that is okay. But the evaluators won't be searching through your website to understand what your current technology or software does. They just look at the information that's in the application. And yes, if you link out to something specific, they can follow that, but they don't have time to do background research to understand your application. So it's very important that all the information that the evaluators need is contained within the application form itself. And finally, if you have questions, of course, as I said, we'll answer them today, but if you have questions at a later point, we have a dedicated email address for the open call. So please feel free to use this one to reach out and ask us these questions, and also to apply for the champion service as well. So at this point, I will pass over to Fulvio. I'll drop the link to the FLUIDOS platform in the chat as well, and Fulvio can explain in more detail the FLUIDOS system and how it works.
Yeah. James, there's a question. Is there any page limitation in the application form?
There is not, no. Just to mention, so in some sections, it does keep it short, but that's only because we have a request for promotional material. So that is kept short because that will be used on our website and in other places. This is part of the application template. But the actual sections where you answer and describe your application, these don't have a limit.
There is another question on the chart. I don't know if you can see the chat, James.
Yep, I can now. Website is a page limitation. Is it possible? Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, so if you've been selected in another open call as part of the same cluster of projects, we will check to make sure that you're not getting funded for the same work. So the applications need to be distinct. You can't receive double funding essentially. So if you put the exact same application in that received funding from another project, this won't be funded. There needs to be a difference, or an attempt to do something differently to what is being funded in another area or through another project. Yaza, if we apply to the first open call, you can present the same proposal indeed with improvements. There is a section in the form online to detail the changes and what has been improved. It's not necessary to send your application to the champions in order to be able to apply. This is just something if you want to, you don't have to. It may help understand FLUIDOS better or orient your application to the project more, but it's not necessary if you don't want to do this or don't need to do this. That's absolutely fine as well. Edge or cloud computing expenses granted. So the funding is awarded as a lump sum. So in the application form, there is a section that asks you to detail what the expenditure will be, but this is just so that we understand whether it's a feasible project, whether the resources are okay, whether the kind of, level of staffing, say, is okay. But we're not asking you to submit expenses, or we're not asking you to submit timesheets. The money gets awarded, and then how you allocate it is fine. Of course, if we get to the end of the project, you've not achieved anything, and then we see that the money has been kind of in your application was allocated because you're going to hire 6 interns and only put them to work on the project, it's unlikely that this will happen because this won't be funded in the first place. So the money is only asked about in the first place to make sure that the resource allocation is sufficient to achieve what you set out. Use cases should be different from those existing. Yeah, this would be preferable. The website, the FLUIDOS website, has details on the use cases from the first call, so you can check that. I'll drop that link in the chat as well, but the information on what they are is on the website. So more detail on the role of champions. So these are the project partners that are the specialists in their particular field, say the cybersecurity of the system. You can send your draft application to us. We will share it with the relevant partner. They will go through it and they will look at it and help you improve the application, basically by saying how you could more align with the FLUIDOS goals, or how technically you could be a bit more ambitious, for example. Fulvio might be able to explain a bit better about this because he's the coordinator of this kind of service. But essentially, it's a way of making sure that your applications align with the goals and the technology of the FLUIDOS project more distinctly. I think for now, the questions are all answered. If there are more, I will return to them after Fulvio's presentation, but for now, we can pass over and look at the technology, Fulvio.
Okay, perfect. Here it is. Do you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So a brief technical introduction and some suggestion how to create an application that could be more successful. So let's start from the original idea of this project. Is that we have so many silos in both the IoT and edge computing, but also in case of cloud computing. So for instance, when you install an application and you run an application on a smartphone, it stays on the smartphone, which looks obvious. But if you think about the fact that very close to the smartphone, maybe you have a laptop, why shouldn't that application use also the laptop? And this is currently not possible. So currently there are strong fixed border across many of the infrastructures, definitely across things. Sorry, I was trying to make the picture. So definitely across things, you cannot deploy an application seamlessly. But interesting also in case of cloud. If you target a Google Cloud, your application has to stay there, and it cannot stay across multi-cloud like Google and AWS at the same time. So this is the starting point. And the current project, the FLUIDOS, which is a very technical project, tries to introduce a level of transparency in where you deploy and how you deploy your application. So the current model is you have an application made by multiple components, and in order to leverage the continuum, you have to say the first component goes here, the second component goes there, the third component goes there, and so on. And once this is done, you cannot change easily where the components are located, because the components are fixed, linked, and connected one to the other, and there is no flexibility in that. And FLUIDOS wants to solve exactly that problem. So create a transparent cloud continuum, so that you have your application made by multiple components. You deploy the application in the computing continuum created by FLUIDOS, and FLUIDOS decides where each component has to go. You don't have to tell FLUIDOS where it has to go. It's FLUIDOS that decides based on some intent that you can specify. So, of course, you can influence FLUIDOS, but in the end, it's FLUIDOS that decides. And it's also FLUIDOS that dynamically optimizes, because if a component was set up here, and at some point this box is no longer available, is no longer the best choice, it will be FLUIDOS to move into another place and arrange all the connection between the other components and the one that you moved accordingly. So transparency is our, let's say, most important word. So we're not talking about just a computing continuum. We're talking about a fully transparent computing continuum. And then we would like to have you on board to help us, whether this is useful, whether the technical choices that we made are good, whether this brings advantages to our existing or future applications. Okay, so how do we implement that? We implement with, let's say, two levels of components. First, we leverage existing components. Let's move here. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Definitely, we need to support embedded devices, physical world, robots, real-time devices, standard servers, and data center both on-prem on the cloud. So the existing world must be supported. And the existing world has an operating system. We don't care. We have to support them all. We don't care. The minimum common denominator of our support is Kubernetes. So we assume that the node that will be part of the continuum runs Kubernetes. I know that this is a strong assumption, but this is how the project is working, and this strong assumption must be respected. Just to be clear, I got some people in the first open call that says, but my application works on OpenStack. Is it okay as well? No, 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 no. Kubernetes is the minimum common denominator, of course. And you know that there are different flavors of Kubernetes, like K3S, Micro K8S, or Vanilla Kubernetes, or OpenShift, or the version used by Google, by Amazon, by Microsoft. Okay, we support them all, but we need to have Kubernetes. On top of Kubernetes, we have another software that doesn't come from the project, which is LICO. LICO is creating a sort of continuum. It is the component that we use to drop the boundaries, to have two clusters at the beginning and see like a single virtual cluster that spans across both. And then we have FLUIDOS on top of all those components. So what's the difference between Kubernetes, LICO, and FLUIDOS? So Kubernetes is the minimum common denominator. LICO, with the idea of the virtual cluster, allows us to see the aggregation of multiple clusters as a unique entity. So basically, if I have my user that deploys an app here, this app can go here, but also there in a completely transparent way. This is the power of LICO. But then, where is FLUIDOS? You know, LICO and Kubernetes are just mechanisms that create the continuum. But there are several things that are missing. So FLUIDOS is adding command and control intelligence on top of that. So for instance, which resources are exported to cluster A? LICO doesn't know and has no idea about that. So FLUIDOS defines some component that creates advertisement of resources so that you know in the end what resources you may leverage in another cluster, and then you can decide to peer. Peer is a term that we use to join the forces with another cluster. So you advertise, you decide to peer, and then you start using this aggregation of resources. Okay, this is FLUIDOS. Or the orchestration. So how do you define intents? Which are the objectives that we have to satisfy when an application is deployed? Like latency? Is it energy? Do we have to decrease energy? Do we have... Okay. Intents, orchestration is another FLUIDOS very important component. And of course, security, because you are leveraging resources which are not yours, are given by another party. Maybe it's even another organization, definitely security authentication. So it's very important. So all those components like command and control intelligence are what we produced in FLUIDOS. So here we are. What do we have? We have some existing project that we leverage, and we have to extend a little bit, but this is a technical detail in the project. And then we created a set of additional components dedicated to command and controlling and orchestrating this continuum, computing continuum. By the way, when I say the clusters in the previous picture, with cluster for me is everything that runs Kubernetes. A Raspberry Pi running Kubernetes is a cluster. Another device running Kubernetes is another cluster. Okay, so cluster is not the big cluster in a data center. It's whatever is running Kubernetes, big or small. For more information about technical details and so on, please refer to the website, but even more important, to GitHub. We have a strong committed in open source. We have everything open, including code and documentation. And starting from there, you can see the quick start guide to our most important components and so on. So we are very open because our objective is, among the other, create a community that believes in this idea. So definitely, we have to be open. And what we are asking for, we are asking the use case, so the new project, to demonstrate the advantage of the FLUIDOS computing continuum. We are not talking about the computing continuum. We're talking about the FLUIDOS computing continuum, which is different. We know that is different. There was a question before, I submitted a project in IROS and ICOS. Can I submit a similar project also here? Definitely you can, but take into account that technically we are rather different. So we have to demonstrate the advantage of this transparency, not the advantage of the computing continuum. This is something that is outside our scope. Our computing continuum, this transparency, which is based on Kubernetes, which is based on Lego. I have to say, most of the projects that were submitted in the first open call were basically very poor in this respect. Because they said, okay, yet another project about computing continuum, let's submit here. No, definitely no. And basically, the preliminary check that was presented by James before, which is made by us. So we say, this has nothing to do with the FLUIDOS computing continuum. This has little to do with the FLUIDOS continuum. It was really important for us, and basically was a check that dropped, or at least said that many projects were really poor in trying to understand what we are looking for. I can see there are some questions, so I stop a little bit here just to see the questions. And I have some more slides, a few just.
There's one from Dr. Elvis Sonic, I think. I don't actually understand that question, I'm afraid. And then there's also one from Alejandro. You are now able to unmute yourself, so if you want to ask the question and potentially discuss, that's also possible. So I don't know, Alejandro, maybe it's easier to discuss.
Okay, I can see the question from Alejandro. I'm not sure there are no mistakes, because there is not design and flexibility. There should not be design and flexibility section in the proposal. There should be design and feasibility. If it is flexibility, it's a mistake. We have to fix it as soon as possible. Okay, feasibility. Perfect. So design and feasibility. It means, how do you implement this? So you have a nice idea. Which components are you using? Tell me that you know about FLUIDOS. Tell me which components in FLUIDOS you will use. And tell me how you will use and how they will solve your problem. If not, maybe how you will extend a little bit those components in order to solve your problem. So feasibility is something very important for us, because we would like to know that you have a clear idea about the computing continuum and how the FLUIDOS components and so on will be used in your project. We'll be very picky on that section, by the way, because of the experience we had in the first open call. Okay. I can understand that you may not have a deep understanding of the FLUIDOS technology. That's one of the reasons we provided the champions, and we provided technical details. We provide a lot of documentation, and we're going to upload also some videos on YouTube and so on. In the end, you're asking for 120K, which is quite a lot. So, you know, we expect that you should have a reasonable, not deep, but reasonable understanding of our technology. I don't know if I answered to your question. Perfect. So I think one more slide. Use cases. Very nice question. Somebody asked before, which use cases do you have already? We have 3 use cases within FLUIDOS and the other 5 funded with the previous open calls. And there is a very strong message here. So when we present our use cases to the general public, we talk about a smart viticulture, we talk about intelligent power grid, we talk about robotic logistics, but forget about that. Our use cases are actually not about smart viticulture, power grid, and robotics, are really not. Because smart viticulture, what does it matter with respect to transparency and computing continuum? So we have to translate the use case into technical use cases. So what do we want to demonstrate with the smart viticulture? And here it is. So our use case, which we call smart viticulture, is actually seamless deployment of services, because our use case partner would like to save money on the deployment and the orchestration of the services. It's better for him to run everything in the cloud if the network connection is good enough. But if this is not possible, some services have to be migrated at the edge. And this takes time and it costs engineers. So yeah, in the end, we're testing everything in vineyards, definitely. But it's not about wine here. It's about deployment, saving money of engineers. So forget about the viticulture. Focus on the technical matter here, seamless deployment. And intelligent power grid is actually, yeah, we run on devices that control the power grid, but the problem that we would like to solve with this transparency is resiliency. With the transparency that we provide, we can have a much better resiliency of the power grid, which was not possible with traditional technologies. And with robotic logistics, who cares about robotic? Actually, our technology really improved the battery usage, and you can see the robots that last longer. So instead of working for 2 hours, they can work for 3 hours, which is a huge advantage for the guys there. So yeah, they are robots, but okay, the transparent continuum allow us to be more energy efficient. So be careful when you talk about use cases. Okay, we need to use nice names that so that the people around there understand what more or less this is about. But for the project, focus on the technical content. So is it another smart viticulture project allowed here? Definitely. Who cares about the smart viticulture? Tell me something that is different from the technical objectives that we are already achieving with our existing use cases. And then you can have whatever smart viticulture use case. Okay, so what matters is not the name, the fancy name, but the technology and how you use the technology to demonstrate what. And this is perhaps one of the important messages that I would like to convey here. And I'm done here. Questions?
And there's one in the chat.
Okay. Regarding open source contribution, do we have to make pull request to FLUIDOS repository, or do you mean contribution to other open source projects? Definitely, for us, it's very important to make stronger the FLUIDOS ecosystem. So for us, Kubernetes, Lico, and the FLUIDOS components are definitely more important. If you need to contribute to other projects, okay, that's nice, but I cannot say, oh, this is so nice. I mean, we have to evaluate case by case. Okay. So the strategy of the project is to create a viable path for this technology to continue and to evolve beyond our project. So our project is based on Kubernetes, Lico, FLUIDOS components. Here it is.
I'm not sure there are any other questions. As I said, you are able to unmute yourself. So if you do have any, you can either drop them in the chat or just ask them directly. So regarding the eligibility criteria, is it necessary for an SME to be the applicant, or is it just that it's present in the consortium? In the end, it's not even necessary for an SME to be part in the consortium. What we do need is an industrial player of some sort. So a consortium can't be formed of, say, 2 universities. There has to be a university and some form of industrial partner. The European Commission does normally prefer that cascade funding goes to SMEs because it's part of their KPIs, but it's not essential. The important part is that there is an industrial partner in the consortia. Okay, I don't.
It seems there are a few questions, no question from the technical side.
So yes, Costas, yes, an SME can apply as a single entity. That's absolutely fine. That one looks like it's for you, Fulvio.
Yeah. So Marco says, is it feasible in the use case to apply and validate the technology to both real deployment and production access together with research prototypes and experimentation? Definitely the prototypes that we're developing in FLUIDOS are not ready for production. Kubernetes it is, definitely FLUIDOS it is not. So I would be scared to see FLUIDOS in a production environment. So for us it's absolutely acceptable that it goes with pilots maybe, but no more than that. Then if you want to risk, that's fine, but I don't think it's required. Luca Capra is asking, is FLUIDOS provided as deployable resource in Kubernetes Helm? Definitely, yes. Definitely, yes. So we have Helm for almost all the components. Yes. Fernando, can FLUIDOS and Lico components be deployed in public cloud architectures? Yes, but just to be honest, we don't have the resources and the time to test our components in all the public cloud infrastructure that are available out there. So in principle, I say yes. I don't know why it shouldn't work, but we didn't do proper testing in this respect. We're still proof of concept. We're not gonna be production ready within the project. But the components that we're leveraging, so Lico and Kubernetes, are definitely out there. So I don't expect problems with FLUIDOS. Okay, Costas, technically speaking, how do you deal with shared resources like huge files that may be needed in a computational environment? I'm not sure I understand the question. In Kubernetes, there are no files. In Kubernetes, there are volumes, and here it is. So we're based on Kubernetes. We handle volumes. We can share or move volumes. I have to say, though, that data is not one of our main strengths. So also, I am completely agree that data is very important. The focus on FLUIDOS was more on the computing side and a little bit less on the data side. Luca, what are the limitations, hardware architecture for edge and far edge devices? Oh, very, very, very nice question, Luca. Thanks for asking. Actually, we have two steps in our architecture. Let's say the main architecture requires Kubernetes to be executed in a node. So let's say a Raspberry 4 is absolutely okay. So from the Raspberry 4 with a couple of gigabytes of RAM, you're fine. A couple of gigabytes simply because one is more than enough to run all our software, but then you have to run your. So, probably 2 gigabytes of RAM is better. But what about at the far edge? So at the far edge, we adopted some experimental components from CubeEdge. So we have some partners, namely ST Microelectronics, that are working on the far edge, and they are integrating CubeEdge with our platform and on the other side with their microcontrollers. So on microcontrollers and in general far edge devices, hardware requirements are definitely reduced. The capability of sharing resources is limited. But still we can share resources. Like I cannot share computing because it doesn't make sense. But I can share resources like hardware sensors and so on. So in this sense, also the far edge comes into play in our vision, also in a slightly different way. Marco, are intents the tool, the application and component can use to interact with FLUIDOS in order to tune requirement and notify changes? Yes, exactly as you said. So intents are our primary way of configuring and driving the logic of our orchestrator, which doesn't exclude first that you may need to extend our intents and so on, or that you do something different. So maybe you write something more low level, so a little tiny orchestrator that targets exactly your problem and then does all the logic. So you are not mandated to use all the components we're providing. In case they are not feasible or the problem has different requirements, we are not supporting that and so on. But in principle, intents are, let's say, the higher abstraction we have in order to drive the continuum. Neil say the first thing for us in a use case would be to implement the FLUIDOS interfaces in our edge on the IoT devices. And the use case project is for that. The question is how long usually to adapt a hardware platform to FLUIDOS? Okay, I think we have to be a little careful here because just porting a new device doesn't bring to us so many advantages. So you have to clearly demonstrate the advantage of your project within FLUIDOS. So having yet another microcontroller in addition to the ST microelectronics one, what's the advantage of us? If you have a different kind of usage of that microcontroller, so you're doing something completely different from what ST is doing, okay, that's nice, and that justifies that you have to port our software to FLUIDOS as well. Actually, technically, it's not difficult. The problem is that you have to be familiar with technologies like FLUIDOS, like Cube Edge, and of course your microcontroller. So if you have already this knowledge, it's not difficult. If you don't, okay, it takes time. Adriano, no, I don't have. I think this is a question from James. For James, if we have already a use case, let's say a useful or a successful use case that we can give to the applicants as an example. I don't think so. Is it it?
I would have one to propose, I'm afraid. Yeah. I'm just checking the follow-up question about the template as well. So maybe I can share. So just to check. In section, it is section 5.2 is the allocation of resources. So there maybe is a slight misnaming. In table 4, it's allocation of budget. Perhaps if I share my screen, it's the easiest way to do this. Share screen.
So while James is looking for that, let me add a note. The template of the second open call is slightly different because we were more focusing on the technical content. And also the weight of the different sections is slightly different. So not just the template, but also the weight, so the importance of each section.
Okay, so if you see here, table 4, as you said, the personnel cost, so this is the cost of the staff. Equipment costs might be, as you say, the cloud or edge equipment, and then any other costs, it can be anything. Generally, we go with the same guidelines as to what you can include in European project budgets as well. We will probably put some information in the FAQs on the website, I think, to clarify this. Maybe that will help. If you ignore here, person 1, it should read partner 1 or partner 2, but it refers to each organization within the consortia. As I said, though, we aren't collecting receipts or budgets or timesheets. The money is awarded as a lump sum. This is just to indicate that the money is distributed in a way that seems feasible to achieve the project. So, you know, if your personnel costs are tiny, it might be considered that you haven't dedicated enough time for the staff working on the project to achieve what you set out. So that's just so we have an idea that you understand the resource distribution required to achieve what the application details. We will put a note on the website in the FAQ section to kind of explain this, give a bit more detail on what can go in each of these.
There's another technical question from Marco Piccone. Is the project adopting or evaluating standards associated with orchestration of application across different computing nodes like ETSI-MEC? Currently, we have no integration at all with ETSI-MEC. I think that this may be interesting. If we consider that ETSI-MEC may be one cluster, so it's one particular cluster with a set of functions that are peculiar for that cluster. So if there are challenges there, it would be nice to know. My personal opinion in this answer.
Okay, we're coming to the end, so I guess we just wait a couple more minutes for any last questions. But if not, we will say thank you very much for everyone who joined and best of luck with your applications. And the last thing I will also just put in that email address as well for any more questions or for the request for the champion service also. So bear with me.
The champion service is very important, so please consider using it.
Yeah, and we will share the slides with you as well in a follow-up. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Fulvia, and hope you all have a good afternoon.
Thank you.